lake had always been more than just water and shoreline to me. It was memory. It was where my wife and I spent the last peaceful years of her life, where we sipped coffee at dawn and watched herons glide low over the water. After she passed, the lake house became my sanctuary, a living tribute to the life we'd built and the love we'd shared. That dock, the shaded bench beneath the old oak tree, even the stepping stones down to the reeds, all of it held pieces of her. I moved to Clearwater Ridge for its promise of tranquility, tucked away from the noise of the world. The HOA was an afterthought, something I barely noticed until Karen Templeton became president. Karen arrived with manicured ambition and a clipboard that never left her side. Her smile was tight, her words sugary but sharp-edged. Within weeks of taking office, she began her beautification initiative, Code for Control. Lawn inspections doubled, new fines sprouted like weeds, and neighbors whispered about her selective enforcement. But I stayed quiet. I kept to myself. I thought if I followed the rules, I'd be left alone. Then her cousin Bryce moved into Lot 19, the property 2 doors down. A brash man with loud music and louder opinions, he treated the neighborhood like a frat house reunion. He parked his boat trailer on the street for days, ignored noise ordinances, and once dumped fish guts near the community mailbox. Complaints piled up, but Karen waved them off, saying Bryce was still settling in. The real blow came on a humid July morning. I returned from a weekend hike to find strangers all over my yard. My private dock. My dock was crowded with folding chairs and coolers. Bryce stood shirtless on the platform, drink in hand, while someone's dog splashed in the water, frightening the loons that nested nearby. I froze. My wife's memorial bench was covered in towels and beer cans. Storming down the slope, I shouted, "Get off my property." Bryce turned, grinning like a man who'd already won. Karen said, "This part's communal now." Something about updated HOA boundaries. Updated what? Before I could demand more, Karen herself appeared, clipboard in hand, dressed like she was hosting a garden party. "Mr. Granger," she chirped, "we recently voted to reassign dock access to improve lake equity. The board decided your shoreline is now designated to Lot 19. My cousin needs direct access, and yours was deemed underutilized." I stared at her, stunned. "This land is deeded, that dock is mine." She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're welcome to file a complaint. It'll be reviewed next quarter." "Next quarter, that's 3 months. She shrugged, as if the delay was my problem, not hers. I looked around at the chaos my flower beds trampled, the dock overloaded, Bryce cracking open another beer. I could feel my chest tighten with fury. But beneath that burned something deeper. Resolve. I didn't just want them off my land, I wanted this to never happen again. Karen turned to leave, Bryce already toasting some joke behind her, but I didn't move. I stood on that slope, fists clenched, heart thudding in my chest. She'd declared war over my wife's memory, over the peace I'd fought to protect, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. If Karen thought she could give away my lakefront and walk away smiling, she was about to learn the hard way some lines can't be crossed without consequences. By the following week, my once quiet lakefront had become a neighborhood spectacle. Bryce strutted across my dock like he owned it, blasting music from waterproof speakers, anchoring floaties that stretched halfway to the reeds. I watched it all from my kitchen window, jaw tight, heart pounding. This wasn't about lake access anymore. It was a test of will, of boundaries, and of whether one man could stand against a petty tyrant cloaked in HOA bylaws. The next morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox, notice of violation. Karen claimed my dock extended 6 feet beyond the revised setback limit. It was a technicality, one based entirely on her newly submitted HOA lakefront map, which conveniently hadn't existed until 3 days ago. Inside the envelope, I found 3 more citations: unapproved ornamental structures, my wife's memorial bench, unregistered landscaping modifications, the stone path I'd installed 3 years ago, and my personal favorite, obstruction of community enjoyment. I wanted to scream. Instead, I filed an appeal. One submitted deed maps, time-stamped photos, even the county's original zoning blueprints showing the land's boundaries, my boundaries. Karen responded with a smile during the next HOA meeting. "Thank you for the documentation, Mr. Granger. The board will review it during the next quarterly cycle." I stared across the conference room table at her smug expression. Surrounded by board members, she handpicked people who owed her favors or feared her retaliation. Only one person refused to look away, Miss Loretta. She sat at the end of the table, arms folded, expression pinched like she'd bitten into a lemon. After the meeting, she shuffled over to me in the parking lot. "Elijah," she said, her voice low, "she's been gunning for control since she moved here. Don't let her twist your grief into weakness." I nodded. "I won't." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old binder. "This is the HOA's original charter. I helped write it back in '89 before Karen's so-called amendments. Take it, you might find something she missed." That night, I pored over the brittle yellowed pages like scripture, and I did find several things for starters. The HOA had no jurisdiction over shoreline boundaries on deeded lots with direct water access. More importantly, it had no legal right to reassign access without unanimous consent from the affected party. Karen wasn't just being pushy, she was operating outside the law. I called the county zoning office and spoke with the surveyor. He confirmed what I suspected. Her updated maps had not been filed officially. They were internal HOA documents with no legal standing. "Want us to do a fresh survey?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. I want it documented, thoroughly. While the paperwork was processing, I took another step. I applied to reclassify my property. Turns out, small-scale agricultural operations on lakeside land fall under a different zoning category. If I registered as a private fish hatchery stocking trout, for example, I could reclaim even broader rights to fence, restrict, and manage shoreline access without HOA interference. The clerk barely raised an eyebrow. "You've got more than enough acreage for that. Most folks use it to raise minnows for bait." "Trout," I replied with a tight smile. "All-American rainbow trout." I placed an order with a reputable hatchery in Montana. 50 fry scheduled to arrive in 3 weeks. But I wasn't done. I hired a land use attorney, filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA, and informed the sheriff's office of ongoing trespassing. Karen's mask began to crack. The music on my dock stopped. Bryce kept a lower profile. And then the day came. County surveyors arrived in neon vests and heavy boots, rolling out measuring tape and hammering in bright orange stakes. Every neighbor watched from their porches. The survey results were damning. Not only was the dock fully within my deeded land, but the HOA's reassignment map encroached onto my property by over 22 feet. Karen called an emergency board meeting that night, but the damage was done. I didn't attend. Instead, I stayed home, watching the sunset from my rightful dock, holding a copy of the survey in one hand and Miss Loretta's binder in the other. Karen had drawn a line in the sand. Now I was drawing one of my own, only mine would be steel. It started at dawn. 2 flatbeds rolled down Clearwater Ridge, engines humming like a distant storm. One carried steel fencing at foot, black iron panels with pointed tips that gleamed in the morning sun. The other hauled cement, tools, and men who didn't ask questions. They knew how to build a barrier, and I was paying them well to make it unhygienic or bellied. By mid-morning, neighbors gathered with coffee mugs and camera phones. Whispers fluttered like dry leaves. "What's he doing? Is that ... steel? Looks like a prison wall." I stood by the mailbox as Karen marched across the street, high heels clicking like gunfire on concrete. Behind her, Bryce trailed with arms crossed, looking more irritated than confused. "You didn't submit a construction proposal," she barked. "This violates Article 12, Section B of the HOA guidelines." I handed her a folder. Inside, county zoning documents, my property's updated classification, business license for a private aquaculture operation, a notarized letter from my attorney, a court-stamped cease and desist order against unauthorized lakefront use. Karen flipped through the papers with a twitching jaw. "You turned your home into ... a hatchery." "Technically, yes," I said. "The lake is being stocked, and as an aquaculture site, I have the legal right to protect my water access. That includes fencing." Her nostrils flared. "You can't block community enjoyment of the lake. It's unethical." "It's not unethical to stop trespassing, it's survival, and everything I'm doing is backed by law." "Then the board will have to know," I cut in. "The board doesn't get a vote on this. This is county jurisdiction now." For the first time since this mess began, Karen didn't have a comeback. The workers kept going, laying concrete foundations as thick as cinder blocks. By evening, the fence stretched across the entire edge of my property. A wide steel gate with keypad access marked the dock entrance. Above it, a sign read, "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted." Floodlights blinked on as the sun dipped low. Motion detectors lined the perimeter. Cameras rotated silently on steel mounts the next morning. I sent out a notice to all HOA residents, courteous, direct, and fully legal. It explained the new land designation, highlighted Karen's unauthorized reassignment of property access, and included a full copy of the county survey. It ended with a reminder my shoreline was no longer under HOA control. Karen tried damage control, but the story had already taken root. Neighbors began asking questions. Some even forwarded me their own grievances and just fines, arbitrary landscaping orders, threats of foreclosure for missing a single meeting. It all culminated the following weekend when Miss Loretta made her move. She organized an emergency HOA gathering, not in the usual clubhouse but right outside the fence. 70 residents showed up, more than any meeting in Clearwater Ridge history. Loretta stood tall in front of the crowd, holding a microphone and a manila folder. "This," she said, waving the folder, "is every complaint filed against Karen Templeton since she assumed office. 42 homeowners. 30 of those claims were dismissed without review. And now, one of us has had his private land stolen and weaponized against him." Murmurs rippled. Karen stood a few rows back, arms stiff, lips pressed tight. "I say it's time for a vote," Loretta continued. "A real one. Transparent and binding. The ballot was simple. Remove Karen Templeton from the HOA presidencies or no. Overwhelming majority marked yes. Karen stormed off before the count even finished. Bryce followed, dragging a folding chair behind him like a defeated soldier. I watched from behind my gate as they left, then stepped out to join the crowd. Loretta met my eyes and nodded quietly, firmly. She didn't need to say anything. We'd both won something that day. That night, for the first time in months, I sat on my dock alone. The lake still and silver under the moonlight. The new trout fry glimmered near the surface, darting through the shadows. Peace had returned, but it wasn't the same peace as before. It was earned, and Karen. She was no longer president, but this story wasn't quite over. In the days following Karen's removal, a strange calm settled over Clearwater Ridge, the kind that comes not from silence, but from the absence of fear. Neighbors walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. Lawns grew a little. Wilder flower beds bloomed in colors once fine for being not. But for me, the battle hadn't fully ended. 2 weeks after the emergency vote, a certified letter arrived. Karen had filed a formal lawsuit, Templeton v. Granger, claiming emotional distress, loss of communal access, and reputational damage. She wanted the fence taken down. She wanted damages. She wanted control back. My attorney, a seasoned land use specialist named Marianne Dunn, called it what it was, a last, desperate swing. She's hoping you'll settle to avoid court, Marianne said, flipping through the pages, but there's nothing here that'll stick. The county classification, your permits, the recorded survey, it's all airtight. Still, I couldn't help the knot that formed in my gut. I'd seen what Karen could do with a clipboard and a loophole. Now she had lawyers. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about the principle, about standing my ground out. We didn't settle. Instead, we countersued, citing harassment, trespassing, and malicious misrepresentation of HOA authority. The documents included neighbor testimonies, drone footage of Bryce's parties, and copies of Karen's fraudulent HOA amendments. The court date arrived on a bright morning in early October. Karen walked in wearing a pearl blazer and an expression of righteous indignation. Bryce wasn't there. Neither were any board members. Just her lawyer, and a stack of papers that couldn't erase months of abuse. When the judge reviewed the evidence, his face barely moved. He asked questions about jurisdiction, about deeds, about zoning, and I answered calmly, every word supported by documentation. Karen, on the other hand, faltered. Her attorney stumbled over dates. She couldn't explain the lack of official filings, and when the judge asked why she had reassigned private lakefront without consent, she stammered, for the good of the community. The judge raised an eyebrow. The community you no longer represent. The room fell silent. In the end, the court dismissed her claim entirely and ordered her to pay my legal fees, but the final blow came days later. The local news station, already familiar with the lakefront fence story, picked up the court's ruling. A new headline ran that evening: Former HOA president loses lawsuit over land grab. Court sides with veteran homeowner. The story went viral again. My inbox flooded with messages from people around the country, some angry, others inspired. Veterans, retirees, single parents, all thanking me for standing up to HOA tyranny. I didn't reply to many of them, but I read every word. Karen moved out of Clearwater Ridge 3 weeks later. Rumor was she tried running for HOA board in her new neighborhood, and was immediately shut down after someone Googled her name. As for me, I kept the fence. Not out of spite, but as a statement, a symbol. The gate was still locked. The trout, it's still thriving. I even posted a small plaque on the inner post, just beside the keypad, greater than in memory of Marie Granger. This lakefront is protected by love, by law, and by legacy. One afternoon, Miss Loretta joined me on the dock. We sat on the bench, cleaned, repainted, restored. She handed me a jar of homemade strawberry jam and said simply, "I'm glad you didn't give up." "Me too," I replied. We watched the water ripple under a gentle wind. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden fingers across the lake. This place, this life was mine again. Not because I fought dirty, not because I shouted louder, but because I refused to be bullied off my own land. Power built on fear crumbles in the face of principle, and sometimes the strongest walls aren't made of steel but of quiet resolve.